The wild horse stood completely still beside the little girl's hospital bed, refusing to move even an inch. Nurses tried pulling him away. Security shouted. Her own father begged the animal to leave. But the horse only lowered his head and softly touched the girl's hand like he knew something nobody else did. For 3 days, the girl hadn't spoken a single word. Doctors said there was almost no hope left. Then suddenly, the horse let out a loud cry that echoed through the entire hospital hallway. And seconds later, the girl's fingers moved for the very first time. Everyone froze. Because what happened next would leave an entire town questioning whether this wild horse was just an animal, or something far more mysterious. And the truth behind why he refused to leave her side is even more unbelievable. But before continuing this emotional story, if you believe that animals can truly feel real love, then subscribe first, then like this story, and share it with your friends who love emotional and inspiring stories like this. Make sure to leave a comment below. Do you think the horse really understood her, or was it something beyond explanation that science can't fully explain? Because what happens next will completely change the way you think about loyalty, life, and miracles forever. Rain hammered against the windows of the small countryside hospital as thunder shook the dark night sky. Cold wind howled through the empty parking lot while worried nurses rushed through the hallways. Inside room 214, 12-year-old Emily Carter lay motionless on a hospital bed, surrounded by blinking machines and whispered conversations. Her face was pale, small cuts covered her arms, and her breathing grew weaker with every passing hour. Doctors had already done everything they could. "She may not make it through the night," one doctor quietly told her father outside the room. The words shattered him. Emily's father stood frozen in the hallway, unable to speak. His eyes filled with tears as he looked through the glass window at his little girl. Only hours earlier, she had been smiling and riding her bicycle near the forest outside their ranch. Now she was fighting for her life. But while fear filled the hospital inside, something strange was happening outside. Near the front entrance gates, a massive black horse stood silently in the pouring rain. People noticed it immediately. The animal didn't move. It simply stared toward the hospital doors with glowing eyes that reflected every flash of lightning across the sky. Water poured from its dark mane as if the storm itself could not force it away. "That horse has been standing there for hours," one nurse whispered nervously. Security guards tried scaring it away, waving flashlights and shouting loudly, but the horse refused to leave. Every time they approached, the animal stepped backward only slightly before returning to the same exact spot. It was watching the hospital. Watching Emily. As the night passed, staff became even more disturbed. Somehow, every few hours, the horse moved closer to the building without anyone noticing. First it reached the parking lot. Then the front walkway. Then the hospital garden directly beneath Emily's room. The moment Emily's father saw the horse, his face turned pale. He recognized it instantly. Weeks earlier, he had seen the same wild horse wandering near their ranch deep in the countryside. Villagers often spoke about the animal in fearful voices. They claimed it was aggressive, dangerous, and impossible to tame. Some even said the horse attacked hunters who entered the forest. But Emily never believed those stories. Without telling anyone, she had secretly visited the horse for weeks. She brought apples, carrots, and water to the lonely animal hidden deep within the woods. Slowly, the frightened creature began trusting her. Emily would sit beside him for hours, talking softly while the horse listened in silence. "He's not dangerous," she once told her father. "He's just alone." Now, standing outside the hospital in the middle of a violent storm, the horse seemed more determined than ever. Late that night, panic spread through the hospital when nurses discovered the animal inside the garden directly beneath Emily's window. Security guards rushed outside again, trying to force it away, but the horse suddenly became violent. It kicked the fence, screamed loudly into the night, and refused to move whenever they dragged it away from Emily's room. Then everything went silent. Thunder exploded across the sky as the massive black horse slowly lifted its head, staring directly at Emily's hospital window without blinking. After Emily lost her mother years ago, her life slowly became quieter, emptier, and heavier than anyone around her truly understood. Her father tried his best, but grief changed their home into a place filled more with silence than conversation. Emily often felt alone, even when she wasn't physically alone. To escape that sadness, she would slip away into the nearby woods behind their ranch. Forests became her hiding place, where she could breathe without feeling the weight of expectations or the tension of unresolved arguments at home. The sound of leaves, wind, and distant birds made her feel like the world was still gentle somewhere. One afternoon, everything changed. Deep near a riverbank, Emily discovered a wild horse trapped in mud and branches. It was injured, exhausted, and struggling to stand. At first, fear took over her, and she wanted to run away. But something in the horse's eyes stopped her. It wasn't anger she saw, it was pain. Slowly, carefully, she stepped closer. Days turned into weeks as Emily returned to the same spot again and again. She brought food, fresh water, and sometimes even small bandages she secretly took from home. Each visit was filled with uncertainty, because the horse would sometimes back away or snort in fear. But Emily never gave up. Little by little, trust began to grow. The horse stopped running away. Then it stopped flinching. And one day, it allowed Emily to gently place her hand on its face. That moment changed everything for her. From then on, their bond deepened in ways no one else could understand. Emily would sit beside the horse for hours, talking softly about her life, her fears of growing up without her mother, her loneliness at school, and her dreams of a better future. The horse never spoke, but it always listened. Completely, calmly, as if every word mattered. Emily felt understood for the first time in years. She eventually gave the horse a name, Shadow. But not everyone saw the same bond she did. When her father eventually discovered her secret visits to the forest, he became furious and terrified at the same time. He warned her that wild horses were unpredictable, dangerous, and could never truly be trusted. He told her she was risking her life for something that could turn on her at any moment. Even the villagers added to his fear. They spoke of Shadow as a violent creature that had chased hunters and injured ranchers who entered the woods. Their stories painted the horse as something wild and uncontrollable. But Emily refused to believe any of it, because Shadow had never once hurt her. One evening, standing beside the river under a fading sunset, Emily made a promise to the horse. She told Shadow she would never abandon him, no matter what others said or believed. And as she spoke those words, something unusual happened. Shadow stood completely still, watching her without blinking, as if he understood every single word she had just said. Heavy rain had already turned the forest paths into muddy trails when Emily rode her bicycle deeper into the woods, her jacket soaked and her hair sticking to her face. Thunder rolled in the distance, but she didn't turn back. Something in her chest told her she needed to go there that day. Then she heard it. A loud, painful sound echoed through the trees, Shadow's voice. It wasn't calm like before. It was sharp, frightened, and full of distress. Emily immediately dropped her bicycle and ran toward the noise, her heart pounding faster with every step. As she broke through the trees near the riverbank, her worst fear came alive. Several illegal hunters were chasing Shadow, shouting and throwing ropes while the terrified horse struggled to escape their grip. "Stop!" Emily screamed at the top of her lungs, stepping between them and the horse. But they didn't listen. Shadow, frightened and confused, broke free and bolted toward the open road, rain blurring his vision. The hunters continued chasing him, completely ignoring Emily's cries. Without thinking, Emily ran after Shadow, trying to protect him from what was coming next. The storm made everything harder to see. The ground was slippery, and the world felt like it was spinning in chaos. Then, suddenly, bright headlights appeared through the rain. A truck was speeding down the road. Emily saw it too late. Shadow ran directly into its path. In a split second, Emily made a choice no one could have expected. She rushed forward and pushed Shadow away with all her strength, saving him from the impact. But there was no time left for her to escape. The truck hit her violently. The sound of brakes, rain, and impact filled the air. Emily's body was thrown across the wet road, and everything went silent. The hunters froze in shock for a moment, then immediately ran away, disappearing into the forest like cowards. Shadow, however, did not run. Despite being free, despite being scared, he slowly walked back to Emily's unconscious body lying in the rain. He stood over her protectively, refusing to let anyone come near. When witnesses and nearby villagers arrived, they couldn't believe what they were seeing: a wild horse standing guard over a severely injured girl, blocking even humans from approaching her. Ambulance workers arrived quickly, but Shadow became aggressive whenever they tried. He refused to move, as if he understood she might be taken away forever. Only when a paramedic gently placed a hand on Shadow's face did the horse finally calm down. Slowly, he stepped aside, allowing them to lift Emily onto the stretcher. Emily was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. But Shadow didn't disappear. Through the pouring rain and flashing lights, he followed the ambulance from a distance, running silently through the stormy night as if refusing to leave her behind. And by the time they reached the hospital, doctors looked at Emily's condition and said the words no one wanted to hear. "She may never wake up again." When Shadow finally appeared outside Emily's hospital room, the entire staff went into panic. A wild horse standing beneath the windows of a critical care unit was something no one had ever prepared for. Security rushed in, nurses shouted, and doctors demanded the animal be removed immediately, but Shadow refused to leave. News of the mysterious horse spread through the town within hours. By morning, people were gathering outside the hospital gates, pointing, recording, and whispering in disbelief. Videos of the horse standing motionless under Emily's window quickly went viral on social media, turning the hospital into the center of attention. The reactions were divided. Some people believed the horse was dangerous and unpredictable, arguing it posed a serious risk and should be captured or removed. Others, however, were deeply moved by what they saw, convinced that the animal was showing real love and loyalty toward the unconscious girl inside. Emily's father was caught in the middle of it all, emotionally shattered and confused. He barely spoke to anyone, spending most of his time sitting outside Emily's room, trying to process everything that had happened. He couldn't understand how the same horse people feared now seemed to be the only thing constantly returning. Late at night, when the hospital grew quiet, he noticed Shadow still standing in the rain directly beneath Emily's window. The horse didn't move, even as the storm poured down, as if guarding something precious that no one else could see. Inside the ICU, a nurse began noticing something strange. Every time Shadow appeared nearby, Emily's heartbeat monitor showed slight improvement. At first, doctors dismissed it as coincidence, explaining it as random fluctuation in her unstable condition. But the pattern kept repeating. Then, one night, everything changed. Emily's condition suddenly worsened without warning. Machines began beeping loudly, alarms filled the hallway, and doctors rushed into her room in panic. Outside, Shadow reacted instantly. He became restless, kicking at the hospital doors and pacing aggressively, refusing to calm down. Then he let out a loud, emotional cry, so powerful it echoed through the entire building. At that exact moment, something unbelievable happened inside the ICU. Emily's fingers moved. Just slightly, but clearly enough for the nurses to see. The entire room froze in shock. Her father broke down instantly, tears streaming down his face as he realized what he had just witnessed. Doctors stood silent, unable to explain what they were seeing. There was no medical reason for this reaction, no logical explanation for the connection between a critically ill girl and a wild horse outside. After a few tense moments, Shadow finally calmed down. He stopped kicking, lowered his head, and stood quietly again beneath the window as if he knew she was still there, still fighting. Inside the room, Emily's lips trembled. And for the first time since the accident, she whispered a single weak word. Shadow. In the days that followed, Emily slowly began to regain consciousness. It wasn't sudden, it came in small pieces. A blink here, a faint movement there, until finally her eyes opened fully and she was able to recognize the voices around her. The first thing she did, even before asking about herself, was whisper a question about Shadow. "Is he safe?" Her father froze, overwhelmed, before gently nodding through tears. That was all she needed to hear. After careful monitoring, doctors allowed Emily to be taken briefly to the hospital garden in a wheelchair. It was the only place where she could safely be brought closer to Shadow without risking her fragile condition. That day, the entire atmosphere outside the hospital changed. People gathered quietly, no longer out of curiosity or fear, but out of anticipation. And then it happened. Shadow appeared. The moment Emily saw him, her breath caught. The horse, once wild and untouchable, walked slowly toward her without hesitation. When he reached her, he lowered his massive head gently into her lap, as if afraid she might disappear again. Emily's hands trembled as she touched his face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even the crowd watching nearby went silent. Many people were openly crying, unable to believe what they were witnessing. For the first time, Emily spoke clearly about what had happened in the forest. She revealed the truth about the hunters, how they had been chasing Shadow, how they had harmed him before, and how everything that day had spiraled into tragedy. Her voice was weak, but her words carried absolute clarity. Police soon launched an investigation into the illegal hunting group. As evidence surfaced, villagers began to understand the full story. They discovered that Shadow hadn't been naturally aggressive. He had been reacting to years of abuse, fear, and survival instincts shaped by humans who had hunted him relentlessly. Emily's father stood quietly beside her, finally realizing how wrong he had been. All his warnings, all his fear, had blinded him to the truth of their bond. With deep emotion, he apologized to Emily, admitting he had never understood what Shadow truly meant to her. As the story spread, the town's perception slowly began to change. What was once seen as a dangerous animal became a symbol of loyalty and protection. A local journalist published Emily and Shadow's story, and it quickly spread far beyond the region, reaching national attention. Soon, donations started pouring in to support injured wild horses and abandoned animals. A small rescue movement began forming around the message Emily represented: compassion for creatures misunderstood by fear. Shadow became more than just a horse. He became a symbol of unconditional loyalty. And Emily made a promise that day: she would spend her life protecting animals who could not speak for themselves. In the end, as the sun set over the fields near the hospital, Shadow walked peacefully beside Emily for the first time, not as a wild creature, but as a trusted companion finally free of fear. Several months passed after the incident, and life slowly began to heal in ways no one thought possible. Emily made a full recovery, though the memory of everything she went through never truly left her. The hospital visits became fewer, and soon she was strong enough to return home with her father. But they didn't return to the same life they once had. Instead, Emily and her father decided to build something new, something meaningful. On their land near the countryside, they created a small rescue shelter for injured and abandoned wild horses. What began as grief slowly transformed into purpose. Horses that were once feared or forgotten were now being cared for, healed, and given a second chance. Shadow remained part of their world, but not in captivity. He never fully belonged to anyone. Instead, he stayed near the ranch, often appearing at sunrise or disappearing into the forests at night. Free, wild, but never far from Emily. As news of their story spread, visitors from different cities and even other countries began arriving. People wanted to see the horse who refused to leave a dying girl, the animal who had become a symbol of loyalty and mystery. Emily, once unknown, was now often called the girl saved by a wild horse. Sometimes, when Emily stood quietly near the fields, she would remember fragments of the past: the rain-soaked road, the sound of sirens, the terrifying moment she thought she wouldn't survive. Those flashbacks never left her completely, but they no longer defined her fear. Instead, they reminded her of how far she had come. Her father, once skeptical and fearful, often admitted that Shadow had given them something they had lost long ago: hope. He realized that without the horse, their story might have ended very differently. That understanding changed him forever. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned into shades of orange and gold, Emily walked out into the open fields. Shadow was already there, standing quietly as if waiting for her. She slowly sat down beside him, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Emily softly reached out and placed her hand on his neck. Her voice was gentle as she thanked him, not just for saving her life, but for never leaving her alone when she needed it most. Her words carried everything she had ever felt but never fully expressed. Shadow responded in the only way he knew how. He lowered his massive head and rested it gently on her shoulder, calm and steady, as if answering without words. In that quiet moment, it felt like everything finally made sense. The narrator's voice would later reflect on what happened that day, explaining how animals sometimes understand human pain in ways people cannot. How loyalty is not always spoken, and how connection can exist beyond language or logic. The final lesson of the story was simple, yet powerful: kindness changes everything. Trust builds bridges where fear creates walls. And even the wildest hearts, when treated with patience and compassion, can love deeper than anyone ever expects. And as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the final message of their story was clear. The wild horse everyone feared became the miracle nobody could explain.